Welcome, everybody. I hope you can hear me okay. So this webinar is being brought to you by myself, Martin Charter, from the Centre for Sustainable Design at University for the Creative Arts. And particularly, we're now in our new business school for the creative industries. So it's going to be about 1 hour, and then it's going to be broken down into several sort of chunks, if you like, where there'll be opportunities to ask questions in the chat box as we go along. So hopefully, if you've got ideas or thoughts, please put those in the chat box. And yes, great if you let me know that you're hearing this okay. So if for any reason it drops out, you can either dial in again or use the dial in option and PIN number that should be on the bottom left hand corner. So I think we're about set. So yes, any thoughts, observations, please put in the chat box and I'll review those at different stages as we go through. So, great. Just recently, as many of you, of course, will know, published this book on designing for the circular economy. It's a 34-chapter book, and I will go into the detail a little bit more towards the end of the workshop. The rest of the workshop really is going to be an overview of sort of trends and issues as I see it emerging, particularly how it impacts on products, new business models, and we'll have a couple of case studies there, particularly on some work we've been doing on converting waste fishing nets into products, which very much fits within circularity, and also work we've been doing in more on the social innovation side of circularity on repair cafes. So get the technology working here. Just a little bit quickly on myself before we go into things. So I'm Martin Charter, Centre for Sustainable Design. I've got a background before academia in business, working in a range of different sectors, from the city to building products to trade exhibitions, marketing strategy. Even launched a startup ebook company in 1994. So I've got quite a lot of variety of experience that I've really brought into academia, particularly focusing around sustainability, products and innovation. So books I've done in the past, around 2 books on greener marketing, one on sustainable solutions and products, and also a co-authored one on system innovation, particularly looking at business models. So the designing for the circular economy builds on other work we've done over the years. So interesting there. Always nervous on anything where you get a black screen. But anyway, now going into the presentation full. So I still see sustainable development as our big picture issue. And within that, after 2015, we had the launch of the Sustainable Development Goals, 17, goals, and under that, a significant number of objectives. So I personally still see circular economy as one aspect of sustainability, touching on a number of goals. There are others out there who suggest that sustainable development is dead, long live circular economy. I don't see it in that context. I see circular economy as part of the broader picture. So of course we had back into 2015, we had the Paris Accord that's really lifted up, climate change and GHG reduction to a higher level globally, and also the UN report, etc., has really lifted up this agenda significantly. But still, we've got sort of one challenge, globally almost out there who's not aligning to this agenda. But the issue that perhaps many people didn't realise, really within weeks of the Paris Accord, the European Commission launched their Circular Economy Action Plan, which was the first significant piece of policy, multi-instrument policy looking at circularity. And really, that has built on a lifting up of the agenda from around about 2008. We've, of course, since the 90s had, a lot of discussion, a lot of activities around resource efficiency and resource productivity. But perhaps around 2008, we had significant, in the time of the economic crash, significant concerns again around commodity prices, access to raw materials. A lot of discussion there about, reinventing economic development even, which led us to look at, issues like resources and materials. And effectively, we have a system that is very good at doing this. We're very good at, producing waste, and we started to really refocus on, new sort of system. So as many of you will have come across this idea of moving away from the so-called take, make, waste economy or dispose economy, from the so-called linear economy to a circular economy where value circulates in the system more significantly over time. And what we've really seen, after the Commission's launch of the action plan, was a number of countries launched their own action plan. So we've had the Dutch launching a plan going out to 2050. We've seen the Finns also launching a longer term plan, and the Finns hosting last year the World Circular Economy Forum, meeting about 1,000 opinion formers coming together around the world, really focusing on, circularity and next level plans. We've also recently had Denmark launch their own plan, and Spain, not necessarily traditionally, one might say, a green leader, but it's interesting, we've seen national plans in Europe starting to be launched. Interestingly, back in 2008, the Chinese launched their circular economy promotion law. So that was really, quite significant. And 10 years on, as we speak, they're revising that law and looking at it again. And I'm not linked directly to this, but I'm off to China for 2 weeks in the beginning of November, where I'll be, engaged in a lot of activity around product circularity. So there's a growing issue in China, but particularly the Japanese have been very focused on, resource efficiency, resource productivity since the 90s, simply because they had no natural resources. And really, they've not really used the terminology of circular economy. But this year, 2018, as a result of some work we were actually doing within the book, we've recognized that the Japanese in 2018 have entered the third phase of their circular society strategy. And indeed, I believe it's no coincidence that the Japanese are this year hosting the second World Circular Economy Forum in Yokohama, just in a couple of weeks' time. So I think it's interesting that the Japanese now are entering the discussion, which they haven't done before. So that said, it's important to recognize with all these big, issues and resource scarcity, climate change, urbanization, technological, progression and acceleration are all part of mega trends. In the sustainability context, we get waves. So maybe one could argue very crudely that 2000s were about climate change. Maybe we could very crudely argue that this decade is around climate change and circular economy, resource scarcity. But the next decade may be around climate change, resource and water. So it's very important just not to get locked into one area. I saw many companies in the 2000s overtly focus on energy and their impact on climate change, neglecting the other issues. So it's important to keep the radar up there and not get locked into one key issue and forget other issues. So important to interesting black screen. Keep things in perspective. Perspective is everything. So keep that strategic vision out there. Do we have any questions right Now, just after that, any thoughts or observations? Uh, if there's nothing right now, what I'll do is I will move on, and please feel free again to add your questions or thoughts as we're going along, and I'll revisit them at the next stage. So I'm now really going to focus much more on circularity, and again, what a key element of circularity is design, as it says on the label there. Thank you, Simundo. I'll come back to your question in a short while. So design is important. 80% of a product's environmental impact is determined at the design stage. So it's very important to consider these issues at the early stages of the design and development process. If one is not thinking about those issues, one is locking in problems. So you can't design for dismantleability and repairability, if you're not thinking about it early. I will come back to other issues on that. Despite that not happening generally, repair cafes are, I could say, as much as proving with the right skills that products can be repaired, in quite a significant number of instances. But generally, we're seeing the majority of products do not have circularity built in, and this is then leading to wider discussions which were perhaps 5, 10 years ago a little bit more under the table, but now moving above the table around built-in product obsolescence or planned obsolescence, and we're even starting to see some legislative reactions to this in countries like France, where they're requiring white goods companies to publish the expected lifetime of the products. I won't dwell on that today, but that is certainly another growing issue. So my opinion, designing for circularity is very much about delivering value through products, materials, and components. And it's not about waste. We should be almost eliminating the concept of waste and editing it from our vocabulary, and we should be thinking about value. So it's about maximizing value in economic and social systems as long as we can over an extended life cycle perspective. So unlike the traditional paradigm within traditional life cycle thinking, we've got extraction, distribution, manufacturing, use, end of life. Really, we're thinking of recycling, etc., end of life. In my opinion, circular economy thinking or product circularity is much more about a focus on the use phase and not the end of life. So it's a lot more, it's bringing the thinking earlier in the process. And again, many of you would have seen the classical Elaine MacArthur Foundation diagram building on the original McDonough-Braungart work about this idea of designing for biological systems. So we're using natural materials, extracting from the ground, going through process back into ground. So natural fibers biodegrading over time. And then in technical cycles, metals, plastics, etc., the products, materials, and components, having their life extended through better maintenance, repair, reuse, remanufacturing, and materials recycling being much further down the line. So some of the key issues we see still in the area is there is no global definition that is agreed on circular economy. There are, I think, 100 and something definitions that are out there on circular economy. Actually, very few of them actually have that link to to sustainable development, despite my perspective of seeing circularity as one aspect of this. So no common terminology at a macro level on circular economy. And an example is a company that I was aware of as some work I was doing, some think tanks around remanufacturing that defined itself as being a recycler in the white goods sector, but effectively they were taking back and refurbishing products and reselling them. So even in the sectors, there isn't necessarily agreement even on the subterms. There's fragmented policy on this. European Commission has launched its Circular Economy Action Plan, and as we mentioned earlier, there are national plans developing. The Commission is working on a variety of policy activity behind the scenes at the moment. But, you know, the issues are quite fragmented. We are getting some countries starting to experiment. So Sweden's starting to look at differential VAT to try and stimulate repair. But really that, policy toolbox, looking at instruments to influence the demand side and the supply side are still really not very coordinated. A lot of discussion, as many of you have been following the issue or involved in the issue, you'll see, well, circularity leads to, business model change, etc., etc. Well, in my view, not necessarily. I mean, if you're a large, complex organization with 1,000 products across 4 business divisions in 15 countries, you're extremely unlikely to change your business model to circularity unless there's a major threat or a major opportunity. So it's highly complex when you've got embedded systems. I see much more of the opportunities arising for startups and younger companies where they've got less of that challenge with the embedded system. So I think, yes, it can influence, circularity can influence or lead business models, but much more difficult if you're a large, complex organization. Many issues and increasing issues we'll see to do with materials. So how can you design unzippable materials? How can you tackle issues associated with maybe old materials coming back to you? For example, you may, if you have metal products or steel products, you might be looking to get back different types of steels. But again, there may be different carbon components in those steels, and then you're mixing up different, grades of materials. So I think that sort of probity around different types of materials and the mixing of different materials is going to become more of an issue. I think this idea of intelligent materials is going to become more important. So this idea that I'll also bring up a little bit later on of the unzipping and rezipping. So what we already see is a company called Aquafil have developed a process to and repolymerize fibers, nylon fibers from fishing nets. So they take those fibers, they put it through a chemical recycling process where they depolymerize the fibers and they repolymerize into a second life fiber as good as new. So, that sort of thinking will need to perhaps emerge alongside new and different types of materials. Of course, how do we get the stuff back? How do we set up the systems to enable that? How do we engage citizens in these issues, of circularity? So it's economic and societal. Most citizens on the street will not necessarily respond to a question on circular economy. But I know from running a repair cafe, for example, which we'll talk about later on, that, repairing a product is something they do engage with because there's a specific benefit there. Another issue is the infrastructure behind the circular economy. So setting up the remanufacturing factories, the recycling factories, the refurbishment factories, on a larger scale, what do we need to do there? Back in the early to mid 90s, the day the Japanese electronics recycling law opened, the day perhaps 50 electronics recycling factories opened across the country that were owned by the manufacturers. In Europe, we had a very different picture, much more fragmented. So there's an issue there about, the work between government and industry to create this infrastructure, for example. How are we going to link circularity and product circularity to the fourth industrial revolution? The whole world that we're starting to see emerge that's around so-called cyber-physical systems, robotics, machine learning, artificial intelligence, etc. So we've already seen the first disassembly robots in action. So Apple's first generation disassembly robot called Liam claimed to disassemble certain phones within, I think, 9 to 11 seconds. So some experimentation is going on. I'm aware that the Chinese have been looking at robotics and remanufacturing. But how also we look at increased sensor technologies embedded in products may enable us to monitor the usage of the products more effectively, to identify strategies to better use those products and better maintain those products. So maybe after 500 cycles of a particular product, a light goes off, it's then telling you as the user to check your product. And by doing that, you might identify an issue with it that you can solve there, rather than it becoming a larger problem further down the line, driving to, non-use, if you like. So, and then how do we bring the different platforms together, where we bring business, we bring government, and we bring civil society together? The Commission launched a stakeholder forum around circularity, which is one attempt to do this at a European level. So, any questions, observations? I know we have one here from Simunda, if that's if I've pronounced your name roughly right. Did you notice any major differences in national approaches? So yes, going back to the earlier slides, we've now seen national plans put forward by the Dutch, the Finns, the Spanish, and the Danes. So particularly the Dutch are taking a longer term, approach to this, and there's a lot of activity around circularity in the Netherlands at the moment. Some of which it is the emperor's new clothes, or whatever the phrase is. So there's people who've joined the momentum without any necessarily real background in this. So everything is new, and there's no necessary knowledge that it's building on a lot of what has gone in the past. We've seen particularly in my opinion, the leading countries around what was previously called resource efficiency and resource productivity were the Germans and the Japanese. The Germans have been a little bit silent on the term circularity, but as I mentioned a little bit earlier, the Japanese are now entering the circularity discussion, where I believe they're going to be sharing a lot of knowledge. I believe there's going to be initiatives launched. So they're hosting this World Circular Economy Forum. So there are different approaches. In the UK at the moment, having been involved with some DEFRA meetings, which is our environment department, the term is circular economy is not being used so much at the moment in government, unless I've missed something. So there's a question from Kate here. Completely understand the complexity for large organizations to achieve a circular economy. Any advice on best practice steps to follow for these types of business? I'll be just coming on to that in a very short moment, in terms of a standard that I was involved in, a guidance standard called BS 8001. So I'll go into that in a little bit, maybe in the next couple of slides even. So moving on. So indeed, it's there, just as I predicted. So basically, around about 2015, British Standards Organisation in the UK was picking up after the Circular Economy Action Plan was launched. That maybe there was a need for more guidance for organisations around circularity, and what happened was quite a large steering group, probably 30 to 40 people from industry, academia, etc., was pulled together to really look at the issue, and then a core group was pulled together to actually write a guidance standard. So that standard was launched last summer, and it's guidance. It's not for certification, and There are several key principles that are embedded in the standard. I haven't got time, sadly, to go into today, but any anybody who's particularly interested in this, please drop me an email, and I can send you a link to a video that expands on this a little bit. The standard is available for purchase, but it's guidance on how you implement circularity in organisations. What's quite unusual with this standard is that the key clauses were also tested with large companies and small companies, and that the feedback from both, if you like, product and service companies went back into the development of the standard. So it was ground truth before it was launched. Often in standards development, the standards are produced by the experts and launched to the world. So, that real life dimension is not brought in. But the standard is very much written as to how one should implement it in organisations, or could, and the issues evolve, around that. So, highlighting again, a lot of different terminology associated with circularity. We had a large debate in the standard about whether we should include the 10 pages of definitions that we developed linked to the terminology of the standard. And often you end up in standards and bring it down to a few core terms. But we decided, no, based on industry response, that it was useful to have this very expansive list of terms. And even within our group, that included a lot of industry experts, and other variety of experts, we didn't define maintenance, which it was actually it's not the most sexy topic, but maintenance absolutely is a key part of circularity in its preventative nature. So, as I say, the rule book's not written on this. It's still very live. It was an error of admission, but it's just an example there. So crudely, in a business context, one can look at it in terms of processes, products, and business models. And I mentioned a little bit my views on business models. I particularly focus on products. If you're an organization practicing eco-design meaning integrating environmental aspects into product development and design, so both, think about materials, energy, water, chemicals. What are some of the links, in terms of circularity in that context? Well, if you're picking out, environmental impacts at a high level, well, obviously resource depletion. So this slide is animated, but in terms of putting it into this slide set, it doesn't animate. So I'll explain it. So basically, any organization has, of course, a whole series of environmental impacts, as we can see on the screen here. In circularity terms, resource depletion is one of those impacts that an organization has on its environment. What organizations do is they use, or they have various product-related aspects in terms of the development of their products that have environmental, dimensions. And obviously, some of those environmental product aspects include, ease of reuse and recycling, materials content. What, of course, the organization also has is its design strategies where it can make improvements. So in effect, an organization can have influence through product improvements on its environmental aspects, environmental impact. So, for example, it can reduce the weight and volume. It can reduce the number of parts in design, which will then consequently reduce, materials aspects and the wider impact. But it's very important also to consider. It's certainly not my advice to purely focus on product circularity and ignore the other, energy, water, etc. There's an example of one phone. This is just, ad hoc observation. I haven't researched this. It's just, in fact, my brother, I bought a particular phone that is designed for modularity. which is good on the circularity dimension, but there was some problems with the battery life. So there's still an issue of balancing these issues up, and this is why one needs to keep in perspective and have that wider view on things, because there are trade-offs. So already, however, and Stefano, I'll come back to your question at the next stage, so thank you for that. Already, I think it's quite significant that some companies are changing their product, their eco-design strategies to take account of circularity. So after the Earth Summit in 1992, several companies started to look at their product environmental impacts and aspects, either using the term eco-design, design for environment, or environmentally conscious design in Japan, for example. And Philips developed their 6 focal areas of eco-design, and quite significantly, they've dropped one of their focal areas now, and now included circularity as one of their focal areas in their eco-design process. And they, as an example, look at designing the products for serviceability, for repair, for refurbishment, and again, they term a particular process refurbishment, where others may call it remanufacturing. They also look at parts harvesting, and then materials recycling much further down the line. So they already have developed their own approach for this, and so have others. So this is HP, similar type of approach, and others are developing their approaches. So a number of the companies are starting to think this through beyond the rhetoric. However, what we found in the BS 8001, in a UK context, even some of the leadership companies are still working and thinking through approaches in a more detailed level. So they weren't as advanced as necessarily they might appear on the surface, and they might and they may not be. They may make certain claims at a high level, but behind the scenes they'll say we're still working on it. So also what we picked up is various interesting, innovative, particularly SMEs and startups that work in the area. So there's a company called iFixit, essentially Apple engineer, launched a business that effectively produced high quality tutorials showing you how to fix your variety of different products. Started up with mobile phones, then moved into other types of products like clothing. Essentially, they produce these high quality tutorials showing you how to identify the problems associated with your product, and the business model then is they sell you the tools and equipment to fix your own product. So this, coming out of other experience I've had, is saying there's now a segment of society that is getting more confident to, you could argue, what might be called self-repair their own products. That maybe happened in the past, but for a variety of reasons that I'll come back to, I believe that segment is growing. We also have Freitag bags. So essentially this was although I banned the word waste, what happened, these just 2 brothers, 2 Swiss designers, saw tarpaulins on lorries going to landfill, and they thought, if we cut unique elements out of these tarpaulins, we could create bags. And they did that, and then they created footballs, and then they created a whole range of other different products. So this is now a very sort of trendy millennial product, but also is in the Museum of Modern Art as a modern day design classic. But essentially, it was, creativity plus resource / or waste / value perception equals product. So it's reframing and looking at things in a different way. In a similar way, this is an ex-merchant banker lady who teamed up with another colleague, essentially to set up a partnership with the Fire Brigade Fire Association in the UK, and she took the waste fire hoses and have created these bags. It's called Elvis and Cressy, that they're then selling in to Harrods in London. So essentially an upcycled product that now has a cachet about it and is commanding a premium. That also goes back to a point that I didn't mention when I was talking about the terminology. When we were reviewing all the standards and laws in the background for the standard, we found there was no definition in law or standards for upcycling. Yet we know, there are examples like this of entrepreneurs taking a material from one product and then see an opportunity to create it into another type of product. So that's certainly happening in clothing, even furniture and other areas. Yet the standards are slow to be picking this up. And perhaps 10 years ago, some of those types of products weren't well designed, but now you're seeing the design element and perhaps a better quality coming into it. Black screen, nervous, but here it is real. So this is also an interesting collaboration between eBay and Patagonia, basically who developed this common threads platform that really was about trying to educate people about second, third life of products and clothing and how to go about repairing, upcycling, etc. So time for some questions or observations. I know we have one here from Stefano. Can you comment on how to implement circularity in the context of strategical ecosystem perspective? Well, Stefano, that's a rather large question. I'm not quite sure if you're talking about societal or economic, or you're talking at the level of a transnational company. If you're talking about the level of transnational company, I would suggest that you had take a look at the BSA 1001 or follow up and the video. I'm not really focused in my activity at the macro level, at an economic level. I'm more looking at organizations and products. So certainly it's a systemic approach, whichever way you look at it, either micro on product, company, or business and society. You can't do it by yourself. You need to work with us. You need to collaborate. You also need to innovate and think differently. So that's one perspective, and there are many others. So there's a question here from Tony. We are a permaculture magazine, so I'm aware of that. My brother's heavily involved. Steve Charter heavily involved in permaculture. Are aware how active Patagonia is. Will this be led by business alone, or do government have a major role in pushing through these changes much quicker than currently? So Patagonia, as you've identified, is an unusual company in that they had sustainability at their core from the mid-90s. So they're not your conventional Fortune 500 company. They're also an impact investor, so they're investing in other sustainable and circular businesses, and I'll mention one a little bit later. Absolutely. We need this tripartite collaborative approach with business, government, and civil society working together in new forms of through new platforms, new types of dialogue, and that was one of the reasons why the Japanese, as I mentioned, with their recycling factories, could bring in such an approach. Is because in the Japanese system you have this consensus building between government, and particularly government and business, where they may be poles apart in the beginning, but then through dialogue they come to a common position. So certainly one of the reasons perhaps when the Japanese launched their equivalent of something called the WE law in Europe to do with electronics recycling, their en masse, the 50 factories emerged because of that consensus. In Europe, there was a lot of issues with waste management companies not wanting to invest in setting up the electronics recycling businesses till the law was in place. In the Japanese system, the manufacturers were running the recycling side of it, whereas in Europe it was primarily the external suppliers. So there are different systems in place. So one from Merrill here. I work with a team that currently don't think in a circular way about their product design at all. Any suggestions for how to get them to start thinking in a different way. Well, of course, I would say buy the book. I do. It is the first serious book with 34 chapters that look at the things, look at different aspects of this in a clear and well written manner. So it's written, in 3,000 to 4,000 word chapters. So on the train, one could read 2 or 3 chapters. So it's not long and heavy and very academic. There are a few other checklists and booklets available, but nothing very systematic. In the book, in fact, in one of my chapters, there is a checklist written from a design point of view about some strategies that designers can think about when trying to bring circularity into their design and development. One element that I still see circularity or product circularity as part of a broader so-called eco-design approach. So yes, we need to think about disassembly, we need to think about repairability, but we've also got to balance that against energy consumption or water use if it's a washing machine, for example. So there are some resources available, but it's important not to purely focus on circularity and to recognize it's part of a wider approach. And on that basis, there are 2 standards that are in development, 2 ISO standards. One that is jointly being produced by International Standards Organization and IEC, International Electrotechnical Committee, which is a standard, again, a guidance standard on how to implement environmental considerations into product development and design at the designer level. And there's another standard called ISO 14006, which for my sins I'm chair of, that's about how you integrate eco-design into environmental management systems, much more targeted to designers. So this gives more general advice about eco-design whilst considering circularity. So there are some standards, and both are standards, as I say, are guidance standards, but if the plan goes ahead, they will be launched. They come to the end of the process and will be launched next year. So I better move on here, and I'll move on to the first case study. So this really is looking at this whole idea of the growing problem of, many have heard of it, ocean marine plastics. And within this, we have a project, we're a partner in a project that specifically look at the problems associated with waste fishing nets, ropes, and components. So, this is a traditional net, maybe that's nylon, it's got, other materials in metals and rubbers. There are also components involved in some of these nets. And, as a result of the growing publicity, there's been a recognition that the oft quoted figure, a UN figure from 2009, that there are 640,000 tons of ropes that go into the sea each year, 10% of ocean marine plastics, is actually a very unreliable figure. So the people in our project mine the data, and it's probably, this is a lower figure. We've actually picked up between 10% to, even I heard figure quoted 70% by weight, maybe by weight, maybe nets and ropes, because some of these nets and ropes are, miles long, absorbing water, etc. So this is a huge growing problem, but it's classically, there's a lack of data. People really haven't looked at it. These are the sort of images you're seeing on the screens, on TV, and almost, to me, in the UK, Sky and BBC are starting to almost fight it out as to who's going to have the better programs now around the problem and challenges around ocean marine plastics. So our particular project focused on the so-called northern periphery area, which is this sort of northern area here. And what we found, particularly after we did a feasibility study where we went around the different ports, was that there's a very fragmented picture. There's a real lack of knowledge around the problem of these waste fishing nets and ropes. It's really, very fragmented legislations around, no specific legislation, although the European Commission is now considering some so-called extended producer responsibility legislation around the nets alongside the work it's looking at on single-use plastics. Also, waste management is very fragmented. Again, a lot of the nets and ropes going to landfill. Significant proportion ended up in the sea for a variety of reasons. And this is what you often see on port sides, quay sides, and so much. These are clean, relatively clean. These you see very contaminated nets in many instances. We've heard of some of these nets staying on ports and harbours for months and even years, contaminated with biological material, with vermin involved. So very unsightly, badly managed. Little incentives to do this properly. We, as CFSD, got involved in this project, despite us being outside the region, because of the work we'd done previously over the last 5 or 8 years, particularly working with eco-innovative SMEs and startups, where we'd worked with 400 to 500, particularly in the southeast of England. And so we brought our knowledge around this area to start to look at the innovation opportunities, the product opportunities. So what we started to look at, is what I call opportunity zones. So if you're thinking about the issue of these waste nets and ropes, so could you develop repair businesses? And we already found some repair businesses in existence in some port areas. The artisanal fishermen, because the nets are very important and they repair, but also some of the larger net manufacturers offer take-back services, because some of these nets are worth, 200,000 to 300,000 euros. So there's a big issue. But that infrastructure could be developed better. Could you reuse some of these nets for sports nets, for example, hockey nets, cricket nets, golf nets, for example? Could there be a reuse opportunity? We also found one specialist reverse logistics company who's collecting particularly the nylon nets and ropes to then distribute to various other players. We found 2 recyclers in Europe, and I emphasize, despite the problem, 2 recyclers, one mechanical recycler in Denmark, and the Aquafil company that I mentioned, who are de- and repolymerizing the nylon fibers into this brand called EcoNile. And this EcoNile fiber is going into clothing, into carpets, etc. What we're also seeing is a range of other products, and we researched this as well, that are emerging in the market. And it may be, a lot of small companies doing this, not a significant number of products on the market yet, but, proactive startups, for example, reusing ropes to make bracelets or jewelry or something. What we also saw is some companies starting to look at fuel from the nets and ropes. So EcoNile fiber, very interesting. The depolymerization, repolymerization process. I mean, I'm not a chemist or a chemical engineer, so I'm not clear as to how innovative this really is. Our network have said it is innovative, but I don't know. Maybe there is a way to de- and repolymerize other types of polymers that has just not been looked at because they have the economic arguments. So basically, some of the fibers are going to, for example, socks. You still have an issue here, for example, with, even though this is a positive example, these Healthy Sea socks includes the second life fiber. They also include cotton, and they include elastomer. But still, you've got the issue at the end of life of those socks, you've got 3 materials. And then how do you separate those materials to effectively recycle them? So, we've got one step forward, but we've still got many challenges here. Interface flaw that some of you may well know. Similarly, through Ray Anderson, who sadly now departed, he drove sustainability into the business, and they've been very proactive over the years. They've been using EcoNile fibers into carpet tiles. We have Klædermusten, who are a Scandinavian outdoor clothing company. They're producing rucksacks using fibers. Adidas are using fibers in some element of the shoes, of different training shoes, and have come up with quite a high profile claims around where they want to be going on this. We've also seen these are Italian designers who are reusing some of the nets into shoes, selling these for about 200,000 even. I guess they wish that, but 200 to 300 euros. And they're another one of the interesting companies, and the companies that we found producing the products. A lot of these guys have crowdfunded their businesses. So these guys have gone through crowdfunding, and they're now, the business is growing, and they're going out looking for finance for the business. Also, very interesting company called Burio. Effectively, it's a US Chilean company, and the guys, one of the guys effectively saw the problem in Chile, thought, could they bring their mechanical engineering skills to this? And basically, they've developed a model where they're working closely with the local fishing communities, where they're taking the nets in. The fishermen will clean the nets, then they will then distribute the nets to be shredded to go to their manufacturing factory in Santiago, where they shred the nets, and they produce skateboards. But effectively, then a proportion of the money goes back into educational projects in those fishing communities. So it really is triple bottom line. But they've expanded into sunglasses, also frisbees for the Jack Johnson music tour, bins, and they're now producing enough pellets from the fibers where they're supplying B2B to an office equipment company. So I'm trying to move on here because of times here. So effectively, part of my thinking here is, should we not be moving away from those images of the disorganized, badly managed nets to well-organized material banks of nets that could be utilized much more effectively in local innovation systems in port areas, perhaps developing specialist, what I term something called CoinLab, Circular Ocean Innovation Laboratories, that might well be linked to maker spaces or hacker spaces or even educational facilities. And anybody who's interested in that area, please email me, because I've open sourced a report on how to set up these circular ocean innovation laboratories. So, and the idea of these circular ocean, these coin labs, they sit within local innovation systems in ports. So maybe then, how could you work with other partners that may exist in port areas, so universities or plastics molders? Maybe part of this coin lab concept is developing the prototypes, then working with other parts of the ecosystem, if you like. Already this is moving forward, where a company, for example, called Fishy filaments is now developed a process to produce filaments for 3D printing using the nets into filaments. And they interestingly crowdfunded for £200,000 and are taking the business forward. We also were a small partner in a separate project where we took something called precious plastics machines that are an open source blueprint of 3 machines: a shredder, an injection molder, and one other piece of kit that I've forgotten, that you can effectively build these 3 machines for a couple of thousand euros. And effectively, what has been done to date is you put plastic bottles in the front of this. This is very, generalized. You put plastic bottles into the machine. What pops out at the end is waste paper baskets, for example. But we were involved in a project where we experimented using the nets through that process, and then we were able to produce a handle that could be incorporated in different products. Obviously, this is extremely crude, but it's real. We and the design partners were able to produce something using this decentralized local machinery. And this is what I'm very interested in this, is how could we decentralize these recycling and other equipment down to the port level, particularly bearing in mind at the moment we've only got 2 large-scale, recyclers who can tackle the nets, the Aquafil or Plastics Global. So what did we do within this project? And I'll move through this very quickly. Is we organize a series of outputs, and I'll just go through this very quickly. Whole series of reports looking at the feasibility study. We reviewed the products. We looked at the knowledge centers. We also did some work on 3D printing and a variety of other things. And again, if anybody's interested in this, drop me an email. We also ran a series of webinars like this, specifically focused on providing advice to startups if they're looking at wanting to set up a business to, utilize the nets into a product. We provide various, advice on how to do that, and we ran that effectively. Though it was targeted at the MPA region, we ended up having people from all around the world joining that. What I also did was build on something called the Green Think process I developed, that I'd run about 70 of these, which was an innovation process, and developed something called the Net Hack Challenge, which is based on the hackathon concept, where participants would go through a series of creative processes, links to challenges about reutilizing nets. And effectively, we ran 3 sessions there, where, again, they went through processes, and then the participants had the nets delivered, and they transformed their ideas with the physical nets into concepts. And coming out of that process, we had a whole series of concepts that were produced early stage. Key thing there, most of the people involved with that were from a design background, so they could make stuff even in a 6 to 8 hour period. So they're able to make prototypes in a very quick time period, which sometimes when I've run similar things for business guys, it's more of a diagram. With these guys, they can make stuff. So again, all of these concepts have a simple expression of what the concept is and a visualization. And if anybody's interested in further developing any of these concepts, they've all been open source through Creative Commons, and we're very interested here. To anybody who's interested in taking these concepts, we can connect you up with the original designers. So we also took this process and adapted the Net Hack Challenge process to something called the Chem Hack, which was based around the quite significant problem of aquaculture equipment. So a lot of nets, etc., for aquaculture are coated in antifoulants that include greases and copper and other unknown materials. So we developed a process innovation technique to look at how to tackle that, to try and remove those coatings to get to the good quality nylon. And again, that was documented in reports that is, again, open source for anybody to have a look at. What we also did was adapted a so-called serious game approach, working with people in port areas to try and look at how we can convert the problem of the nets and ropes into an opportunity. And we ran several of these, and lastly we ran a competition to try and open source new ideas. And when that particular project, Circular Ocean, has now completed, we're literally just about to start a new project that is going to take a lot of these ideas forward, particularly in port areas, more directly in that northern periphery region. And that's very live. I go to the kickoff meeting on Wednesday night. So again, anybody's interested in that area, please come back to me. Any questions? If not at the moment, maybe I'll just continue to move through, and then we can pick questions. Maybe I'll pick up questions at the end as time is moving on. So moving into the last section, I see that we're in a sort of quite a paradigm shift at the moment. On one hand, we've got the whole industry 4.0 aspects. We're in the age of acceleration in technology, machine learning, artificial intelligence, further expansion of robotics, both in a business-to-business context and a consumer context, big data, digitization, et cetera, sensor technology. So we got this high-level, development, particularly driven by a number of the larger technology companies and indeed a number of countries developing their own strategies. So the Germans developed the concept of Industry 4.0, which built on their manufacturing strategy. China have their 2025 strategy that similarly is look at Industry 4.0, and others have similar strategies. So what this will look like over the next few years and how it's going to impact on circularity, are unclear. So, but what I'm seeing also is a whole shift of what I'm calling reindustrialization 2.0. That's much more decentralized, about making, modifying, fixing, and has the potential to be more low carbon and more circular. And so this is a grassroots innovation activity happening generally from citizens and motivated individuals. So it's a sort of second, paradigm shift in terms of the so-called maker movement. But we've also got the emergence of different terms, emerging. So people around that area of making, modifying, and fixing. And indeed, this has been picked up, in a number of different sources. So in Obama's time, he ran a maker space, big maker space in the White House lawns. It's hit Wired and many other different things. It's certainly in the UK context, you see often these things emerge on things like Click on BBC. So there are various things that I believe that are driving this, and I've just picked up two elements to this. Number one, the surprisingly short timescale of the emergence of online videos. Really, we've only had for 8 to 10 years the mainstream access to online videos, YouTube, Vimeo, etc. And those images of people making, modifying or fixing products, even if they're not necessarily the best videos, are giving people an idea about how to do something physically, much better than written material. So the advent of online content is helping people. Also, the advent of places and spaces to enable modifying, making, fixing is another driver. We've had the emergence of Fab Labs out of MIT. Then we've had maker spaces that are spinning off, from different organizations. Again, numbers growing on this. We've got hacker spaces. Again, I'm sorry I'm speeding through this a bit. There are slight differences between some of these. But also, on the repair side of this, or on the fixing part of it, we've had, the emergence of repair cafes. There's now about 1,600, according to the Repair Cafe Foundation's website, about 80% in the Netherlands. And there's another perhaps 400 in Germany that are not aligned to the website of this Repair Cafe Foundation. So I think what I'll do is I'll move on, and if anybody has any questions, let's pick this up at the end just for time. So we did the first 2 global surveys on this through my center to try and look at this whole issue. I heard the founder of the Repair Cafe speak at the Hanover Fair, and I thought, right, now this is really interesting. Nobody's done any research on this, and we partnered with them to do a survey. So got a reasonable size survey here from a number of countries, and essentially why do people participate in these repair cafes? Well, most of the motivation is altruistic. So a lot going on about giving something back to the community, helping develop more sustainable communities. And it's really driven by citizens. It's not driven by big governments or local authorities. So in terms of the barriers to setting up repair cafes, and I should say that, I should recognize, of course, although I understand them, not everybody does. So repair cafes are generally community spaces where people will, citizens will bring broken products to a space, and traditionally there will be a workstation for electronics, mechanicals, bicycles, clothing, and maybe furniture. And quite simply, the volunteers will repair products. So that essentially is what a repair cafe is, and it's part of a broader group of what one might call community workshops. So here, looking at that higher level, generally people saw very few barriers. Marketing was seen as a barrier. One of the real barriers in some countries has been gaining insurance, because there are 2 elements to the insurance of this. There's insuring the venue itself, And often these repair cafes are run for 2 or 3 hours, maybe once a month. Some have different models. It's about ensuring the health and safety during the event, but also there's a product liability aspect. If basically the guys repair a product and somebody takes it home, there's a problem. Obviously, the repair cafes need to have some insurance against that. Interesting to date, and I'm touching some wood big time here. There has been no reported cases of citizens trying to go after repair cafes. But on the sheer numbers, there must have been some issues. But so far, it hasn't been an issue, and that may be because people are often bringing products along that they hope can be repaired, and then if they're repaired, that's great. But if there then is a subsequent problem, they sort of know what they've got in. They've got into this voluntary initiative. So basically, the types of products that are coming in are often small kitchen appliances, household appliances, vacuum cleaners, lamps, etc., clothing. So there's a huge variety of products coming in. And generally, and I still find this quite an interesting figure, globally, the repair rate, as quoted by the 300 plus organizations, is 63%. And that's 63% of products can be repaired within this 3 to 4 hour window. And indeed, cutting a long story short, as a result of doing these surveys, I decided to set up a repair cafe in Farnham, which has then led to setting up a charity. And we're now 41 or 2 sessions down the line. Huge variety of products have come through. Interestingly, we're up to nearly, I think this weekend we hit our 700th repair completed. We have a 63% repair rate. Yes, we're not fudging the statistics. It's exactly as per the global statistics. We weigh every product that comes in. So we've diverted over 2 tons through repair, has been diverted from landfill, which is about 19 tons of carbon. And also we retain a very high satisfaction level with people coming through because of the friendly nature, the community nature. And we've also saved the citizens of the town nearly £47,000 through them not having to buy a new product. So we see these sort of things, people collaborating, and we have a mentality of share the repair, so people observe the repair process. We've even got new technology coming. We've had our first 2 drones came in the last 2 weeks, which is an interesting thing. And repair cafes are about, as they say on the tin, it's about repair, but it's also about this community, this social dimension. So, a very important part of it. So just, in the last part of this, a few more stats, but they hopefully are reasonably interesting. We followed up, our own repair cafe attendees with a survey. We found that fairly well paralleling the global dimension, most attendees are 50 plus. We also found that for another piece of research that I don't have here, that the majority of attendees are females in terms of who are bringing the products. We find a lot of retired or semi-retired people who are involved, particularly as volunteers. A lot of those people, either as visitors or as volunteers, aren't necessarily linked to other sorts of what you'd think of as traditionally green groups. And perhaps repair cafes are a modern form of environmentalism that's not about waving a banner, it's about solutions. And indeed, some of our volunteers and even some of our trustees of our repair cafes are not necessarily people you think as traditional green people. So there's a lot more of this sort of pragmatic element to it. Our biggest source of promotion or source of people hearing about is word of mouth, which links to this whole issue of the satisfaction, the friendliness. A lot of electronics, always our busiest station there. Motivation to come. Well, there's this very strong ethic of people not really wanting to waste stuff. They really don't want to waste stuff and send it off to landfill. And it's often that lack of cost-effective repair infrastructure is driving things to community recycling or landfill. And this is a bit of a complicated slide, but essentially what it's saying is in our town, for example, that there is poor infrastructure for the repair of small electrical items, for furniture and kitchen items, toasters, etc. So that parallels the sorts of products and part of our gap. I like this slide because we have this share the repair mentality where you can only have your guys attempt to repair your product if you sit down and observe the process, the share the repair mentality. What we found is as a result of people observing and learning, there a significant proportion of people have had to repair the product themselves. So it's given people the confidence to have a go. So just in finishing up here, this is again quite an impressive statistic here. This is based, I think, originally on 216 items, but 82% of products leave the repair cafe successfully or partially repaired. And there's another piece of research that again is not in here that the guy who also did this research has just come up with, saying that 80% of the 63% of products repaired are repaired by the skills and knowledge of the repairers in those 3 to 4 hours. So with the right skills, despite products not being designed for disassembly or repairability, they can be repaired. And there are massive skills in local communities. So, textiles, bicycles are the highest repair rates, electronics lower because of the complexity. The products needing most repair that come in, well, that's here, I won't repeat it. Vast, this is almost, we're now about getting on for 400 to 500 products from this. So we've had, toy cars, all sorts of things over the years. Excuse me. Top product failures, 14% are worn and torn. It's clothing. This is an interesting one. Going back to thinking about circular economy is much more about the use phase than end of life. 12% of products come in as not working, and the diagnosis is poor maintenance or the need for adjustment. So we've had, even situations where the guys have opened up vacuum cleaners and they've just been cleaned out by other vacuum cleaners and they work fine. So there's still a lot of stuff to do with the use phase there. Also, where the components are needed, the majority of the times those components are very cheap, less than £1. And what often happens for the electronic products is the guys, if they can't fix it, then they'll identify the missing component. The product owner will then go and buy the component via eBay or whatever, and then bring it along, and the guys will fix it the next time. So again, just emphasizing this vacuum cleaner example, the biggest issue associated is poor maintenance. So just in closing here, designing for the circular economy, it is, designing for the circular economy is important. It's important to think about things right at the beginning of any product or any organization, how you can integrate the considerations of circularity into your products or product service combinations. And we need to see innovation happening at all levels, at an incremental level, redesign right up to system innovation. If we're to get towards a transition towards a more circular economy at every level, product to organization to economy and society, the transition will need to be dealt with by business, by government and civil society, and it is a systems level change. So just in closing here, do we have any final questions or comments? I think there was a couple of questions that came in. I think maybe there was 2 questions here. One from Kate. Apologies, Martin, I have to drop off here, but So interesting. Okay, well, that was great. Gabriella, could Repair Cafe be a barrier to the creation of new sources of work within a circular economy? What do you think? Well, it gets into some interesting questions about work. If we're going to see jobs being lost by Industry 4.0, maybe there's going to be new forms of work that are needed for people. We very much within the Repair Cafe are absolutely not taking repair away from other repairers. Are in our own case, a laptop repair organisation displays our leaflets, a phone repairer displays our leaflets, and most of what comes through us is generally not economically repairable. So that's not economically repairable in a Western context. So still, the idea of a repair cafe in certain countries may not work because of the informal sector where repair happens, in the streets, under poor health and safety. So absolutely, we see it as complementing professional repairers. I think, and we are very careful in only taking products that you can get through the door. So we don't generally deal with larger products where there are more advanced repair operations. We actually don't get that many phones or laptops coming in. We will repair them if we can. So in that sense, there's certain products go to repairers, in our town and don't come into us. So we haven't really seen that. But there is a bigger issue thinking about circularity and society, and particularly also from other experience I have of other community repair operations, not necessarily repair cafes, who work with disadvantaged people, people with alcohol issues or drug issues, and they run repair operations, to help people get back into society. So the repair process is really a process to get them working again, to get them back into society and get them, back into jobs, etc. So I don't see there's a trade-off there. So do we have any other comments or questions? If anything else, I'd just like to sort of say thank you very much. And if anybody has any questions or comments or anything sparked any imagination, please send me an email, but keep it very, very short, as short as you can. I like bullet point emails. So I like to say, I hope you found at least one thing out of that useful. I will hopefully the recording has been taken here, and then I will send out the recording as well. I think there was one last question here from Tony. Would be good to have one or two companies in the magazine as advertisers as best practice. Burio, yeah, no, Burio, very good. Fab Labs Makerspaces all sound great for including in the magazine. There is we had a visit from a repair cafe that was supposed to be setting up in Petersfield, which I think I think that's quite close to you, if memory serves me right. But there are other repair cafes forming in different parts of Hampshire, for example, if I'm not wrong with your location, Tony. But again, we can email on that. So, okay, well, thank you. Thank you all very much. As I say, I hope you found at least one thing interesting and useful there. And I will probably be doing a second one of these again in December, subject to interest. And because I think we were booked out for the capacity of this software. But please, of course, I would say, please feel free to buy the book. It is good, and I'm not just saying that. So thank you very much, and have a good evening.